Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the weekly live stream for the Restitutor Orbis channel. And I am your host, Lucius Aurelian, and thank you for joining me for this wondrous live stream. So I finally decided to tackle the great topic, a giant mystery, the accounts that we have of giant life forms. And I'd like to extend a welcome to all viewers, all Prime Explorers, and all others joining us. It is great to see you this evening, or wherever you may be in the land. So what we're really going to do is look at the different accounts that we have of giants. We're going to examine giant life forms. Now, yes, we'll talk about human beings to an extent, but we'll also talk about other things, other topics about what may be giant and why we have these accounts of giants. And why is this such a contentious topic even to this day? And I'm sure you won't be surprised to know that the origins of it come from the 1800s. Yes, something else that originates from the 1800s or the 19th century, much like everything else seems to. So, in deep diving on the giant mystery, let's look at the rumors of giants. And where did most people hear of giants first and foremost? There are many legends, mythical accounts, biblical accounts, and other holy books of other religious faiths that indicate that there were giants in the distant past. Great creatures that were much larger and inhabited the land. And these creatures may have been good, they may have been evil, and they may have been everything in between. And it should be noted that the myth is not relegated to just simply biblical religious tales or just some of the old myth. It's also in many of the fantasy works that we look at. You may remember that very intriguing and yet very little background information provided scene of those giant rock creatures fighting in The Hobbit. I mean, I've got to admit, from the Hobbit trilogy, the first film was the best. After that, I mean, let's be honest, they didn't have a lot of plot to work with. But I always found that account very, very interesting. And the fact that there are many giant creatures in Tolkien's work, and it is inspired, apparently, from myth. But where have you first heard of a giant? Was it in a myth? Was it in a religious tale? Was it reading the Bible, the Quran, the Torah, anything? Where have you heard about giants before? Was it watching a film? Was it reading a book? How have we heard of giants? And why do they have such a profound effect on our psychology? There's also considering the fact that giants are very contentious. And we're going to go in the background and look at that and see what that's really about. Oh, there you go, Heidi. Beanstalk. Yes, the good old fairy tales, the original fairy tales that we have. Elusive Truths, good to see you. The giants are intriguing. Also, the island with giant animals and insects. Oh, yes. Or the island with the Lilliputians, if we're talking about Gulliver's Travels, right? Isn't it funny how it goes both ways? That sometimes we have these accounts of these incredible giants, and yet other times we do not. Ah, New West Reset. Yes, Goliath. And Comabot, Bible, Goliath. And yes, actually, that seems to be where most people, whatever faith they may be of, seem to have heard of it, because the whole concept of David versus Goliath is, you could say, it's transcended the limitations of just the people who read the Bible or those that are into the religion. I'm not knocking it. I'm just saying that the tale, the account, has transcended it. A lot of people are aware of David and Goliath. It's also worked its way into mainstream pop culture because it's still a comparison that when you say David versus Goliath, most people are aware of it. In fact, Dr. Hans Reinhardt even drops the comparison in 1979's film The Black Hole, when Maximilian faces off against Vincent. Although in this case, David is overmatched. I'm not doing a very good Hans Reinhardt. Anyways, the whole concept, though, being of the individual who encountered the biblical giant. And we're well aware of the tale of how David slew Goliath with his slingshot and utilizing tactics and guile to overcome the strength of the giant and also his impressive physique. And so, looking at the origins of giants and why they play such a strong role in pretty much everything that we have. Oh, who was that from? Oh, thank you very much. I'm working on it. You know, we also have to save ourselves, right? But I appreciate that nonetheless. Oh, there's a good one, Sarah. Yeah, Shrek. And you know what? I'm glad you brought that up, Sarah, because Shrek is actually one of the more mainstream pop culture examples, even from the 21st century when Shrek really became very popular. So great comment there. Now, people give me a lot of grief because of the fact that I try to be plugged into pop culture to an extent, but I think it's important because we know that pop culture is the way that the general perceptions of the main population is being steered. And so I think it's important that we maintain awareness of that. Jamie, I think they have regenerative powers. Why David had to remove Goliath's head. You know what's really interesting too about that, Jamie, is apparently that whole concept of Goliath's head needing to be removed is what inspired Gregory Wyden when he wrote the original Highlander screenplay. You know, before the producers, as Clancy Brown euphemistically referred to them as a couple of scavengers, got a hold of that script and changed it a little bit, the premise still existed that yes, the giant's power was with the head, and removing the head is how you remove the power. And that did carry over, inspired, or who knows, maybe it was based on something real, the entire Highlander franchise. Which let's be honest, there was only one really well written movie. Although they did have some decent sequels with some good ideas, but you know, we'll leave it at that. New West Reset, Battle of the Gargantuans. And there's always been something that's been compelling about that to us for that very reason. The whole concept that there was no way David should have been able to stand up against Goliath. Now, in another 21st century example, if you saw that Troy film, you might remember when Brad Pitt took on the mighty warrior. And I'll be honest, I don't really remember much from that film. It wasn't, I thought, very good. I mean, when you remove the entire concept of the deities from it, you know, the gods and goddesses, they played a very essential role in Troy, and the director thought it was silly. Well, creative choice, but I just didn't, you know, I didn't really appreciate it that much. You know, Brad Pitt and Eric Bana gave strong performances, but when you remove the core of the story, which is the intervention of the gods, which oddly enough is something that happens in a lot of 21st century storytelling, I'm not sure why, not all of it, but a lot, then it seems to detract from the story. So yes, that's what we have, this old account. Now, oddly enough, there's a little bit of historiosity, historical account, if you will. Who here has heard of Roman Emperor Maximinus Thrax? Quite a name, it just rolls off the tongue. Sounds like someone that should be portrayed by Arnold Schwarzenegger or Sven-Ole Thorsen if he's going to fight Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? And so that's what makes it so intriguing, is that we have this historical account of this Roman emperor. Yeah, there you go. From Thrace. Yes. So many coming from Thrace during that time frame, during the so-called crisis of the 3rd century, if we take the Roman history at face value. And I think you're pretty well certain that at this point, I don't really do that. And I can't imagine why I don't. So, hey, Petty, good to see you. It's been a hot minute. So, but the historical account says that Maximinus Thrax did exist. He was a Roman emperor. And in addition to him, we also have these images. Now, the reason I'm showing this is it's important to remember that when we just go off of photographs, there seems to be a bit of an initiative, if we will, whether it's intentional or unintentional. I think we can assess that it's intentional, of giants being one of the greatest elements of, well, conflicting information and conflicting accounts. And we're actually going to look at that. Yes, I'm going to deep dive into the Smithsonian element of this and why the Smithsonian is associated with this. No, I'm not pointing my finger and saying the Smithsonian is hiding anything. But I am going to talk about why there's so many perceptions that the Smithsonian is involved in things. And remember that whenever we have an image, we always have to question it. An image may be authentic and it may be constructed or fabricated. Are these Nephilim giants under the government watch, or is this just a fabricated image designed to induce a dramatic response and keep people's attention focused? And then even more directly, ensure that people are not exactly thinking things that they shouldn't be thinking. That is, that giants are real and giants possibly exist. Yeah, the Kandahar giant. That's another good one, Hoop Oracle. And accounts that we've got of involvement in Afghanistan and so on and so forth. So, PK, is this photoshopped? Apparently it is. So, as I always say, I don't know, but you know, my guesstimation is yes, this is photoshopped. It's appeared in many different places. But keep that in mind. You know, we're not just going to look at photos. We're actually going to look at an account of a story of a real giant that someone unearthed, apparently, and then what happened in lieu of that. So it's just something to be aware of. Anyways, it looks real. It looks real, yes. But is it real? Do we know? I don't think it is real, but it might be. I can't discount it. It is intriguing. That's a good one. It's Merlin. Yeah, it does kind of look like Merlin with the beard and everything. But you just don't know. I mean, unless I was actually the one that put this photo together, or collected it from an archive, and again, no one really knows for sure. That's one of the difficulty with images these days. At the end of the day, they're not the final definitive proof. There's also the many different stories that we have, such as Gulliver's Travels, where we have Lilliputians and giants. And also think of it from the other perspective. What if there's actually beings out there that are small humans? So is the guy on the right a giant, or is he one of our regular sized humans? And the guy on the left in his hand is actually a Lilliputian or a smaller being. It's a really interesting juxtaposition when you think about it, all these different comparisons and so on and so forth. I expect a bit of media competence here. Oh, come on now. Do you really know what media competence is and how that works in court and how it works in, oh, there you go, Robert. Fee, fi, fo, fum. Yeah, exactly. But if you want to think that there's direct answers and that people can tell you exactly what yes and no are and what real and what unreal is, then by all means. So, Leo, almost every myth around the world contains giants. Yes, agreed. And that's the whole point when we derive it from biblical accounts and so on and so forth. There are a lot of different references to giants, and they transcend many different accounts. And so that's why we say rumors of giants. Now, was Gulliver a giant, or did Gulliver actually encounter smaller people? That's something else that really enters my mind, because we have all these different scales, if you will, all these different dimensions of size. And I even remember in the 1970s, they had that theory about, well, there could be an entire universe within the atoms of my finger. Although then there's always the discussion, do atoms really exist? Well, science assures us that they do, but at what point does size stop? And of course, I still remember Carl Sagan trying to figure out about how many cuts it would take in an apple pie until you reach the apple. Of course, as he said, the pie is too crumbly and you can't actually reach the atom. But if we could, how many cuts would it take? Yeah. I think that was episode 7 of Cosmos, but it doesn't matter. And then going back to Maximinus Thrax. Yes, we do have some Roman coinage that indicates that Maximinus Thrax existed, apparently. Although, of course, we don't know what year it is, because remember, those Romans, despite being so organized and capable of doing stunning architectural and engineering achievements, didn't really seem to bother to want to put dates on their coins. And you'll say, well, they just put the emperor's face on there. That should be good enough, right? I mean, that's corresponding to the year. You don't need to put the year on Roman coinage. I just always found that funny. And, there's other allusions to Maximinus Thrax, if he did indeed exist. And how tall was Maximinus Thrax? Well, he was stated to be over 8 feet tall. Now, I'm going to ask you all a question right now before we go further. Is 8 feet tall something beyond physical impossibility? Has there been a human being that is very well documented, well recorded, and undisputed that was actually over 8 feet tall? And what are the responses I get on this little question? Because, these kind of things just always make me interesting. Oh, there you go, Baja Giant from WCW. Yeah, that's right. Jamie, yes, you are correct, Jamie. Oh, there we go. PJ Kocher. Yes, Robert Wadlow, the Alton Giant. We're going to get a look at him, and he's still in the Guinness Book of World Records to this day. Robert Waldlow. Yes, that's the name. I believe there's a W at the end of it, but yep, same name. So, and in fact, Robert almost got up to 9 feet tall, interestingly enough. So, oh, yes, you're right. New West Reset, Canada had 2, a man and a woman. So there have been multiple people who have actually been over 8 feet tall that are very well documented. Now, the only reason I'm going to focus on Robert is because he's stated to be the tallest, and it's undisputed. Robert Waldlow. So there you go. Oh, yes, Jamie, there are photos of Mongolian giants. There's actually all kinds of photos of giants. Now, we can go back and forth on the veracity of the photos, and I'll admit some do look very, very authentic. Some do not. And you just have to ask those questions, because it is possible to put together a very good image that looks very authentic that is not authentic. Believe me, I know. I've done it a few times. No, I've never shown one of those images since I've been doing these presentations. In fact, I often get a lot of criticism because I use poor images, but there's a reason for that. I'm not trying to fool people with images. That's not my intention here. You ultimately have to come to your own conclusions about what the images we use are and what the images that you see every day. Because it doesn't matter what I show in this little YouTube channel on these little live streams. You're going to see all these images through many different mediums every day. Ultimately, you have to come to your own conclusions. Ooh, yeah, the Solomon Island giants. That's another good example, Ted. I mean, at the end of the day, they're all over the place. It's not just the mythical or religious accounts that we have, it's the fact that there are legends that they have originated all over the place. Yeah, that's another good one there, Griff. Yep. Jake Ehrlich, 8 foot 6. And so we've got multiple examples, many individuals who've broken the 8 foot barrier. So Maximinus Thrax doesn't seem so impossible. Although, did he really exist? Was he actually a Roman emperor or was there something else? Those are the kinds of questions that we need to ask, especially when it comes to Roman history. So, with that said, let's take a look at some accounts that we have of plants and animals that are quite giant before we deep dive into humans, because we want to start at a certain place and determine where this giant or colossal mentality begins with. So, let us go to this next image here. And I would like you to tell me if anybody knows where this is. I'm sure many of you do. And even if you haven't actually been here, you've probably seen it on a film or two. And let me make sure you got full screen on that one. There we go. And does anybody know where this is? Oh, yeah, the Kraken. And I'm sure you're referring to the real Kraken from the original Clash of the Titans, right? Mm. Oh, Win says it really good. Yes, a stump. It does look like a tree stump, doesn't it? And where is this? Oh, Jamie knows where it is. The Aussie knows where it is. Devil's Tower. That's the name of it. So, QCZ. That is Devil's Tower in Wyoming, although it's really only a stone throw across from the South Dakota border. So, if you're heading out that way on I-90, then you can go and see the Black Hills. You can go see Custer National Forest, and then just go a little further down the interstate and come to this beauty, Devil's Tower. Mashed potatoes. Yeah, well, funny you say that, New West Reset. Good to see you, by the way. They also have statements that there was a bear that scratched it. Hey, fairy girl, good to see you. Been a while. It's a haunted place. Yes, there's all kinds of legends with this location in Wyoming. So, first and foremost, what does science, what does the mainstream tell us about this? They tell us that this used to be a volcano. It was formed by a volcano, isn't it always? Now, yes, it may look like a tree stump, but just because it looks like a tree stump, just because it has qualities of a tree stump, does not mean it's a tree stump, okay? It is a volcano. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Now, just because nobody actually witnessed it forming, and it's not possible for anybody to have witnessed this forming, or was it? That we know that a volcano did it. At least that's the certainty that we have from our scientific and historical authorities. And remember, they're one and the same. But yes, scientific and geological assessments on this, it's just a volcano, and that's all there is to it. Now, it was featured as a key terrain feature in the film Close Encounters of the Third Kind. You might remember when Richard Dreyfuss's character went bonkers, this is where he wanted to go to. And it's a good thing for him that those aliens were benevolent and not malevolent in that film. So, anyway, now, does it look like a tree? Yes. If it was a tree, could it have once been a great tree? Yes. But remember, science tells us this is most definitely not a tree. So therefore, come to your own conclusions. It looks like a tree to me, but. And then in Ireland, so going from Wyoming, vicinity of the Rockies, or actually the Great Plains, it's right before you get to the Rockies, to Ireland, we have Giant's Causeway. Giant's Causeway, oddly enough, it has a lot of structural similarities to what we just saw with Devil's Tower. And you'll never guess what science tells us about the origin of Giant's Causeway. Now, I'll tell you the myth in a second here, but of course they tell us that it's, once again, those volcanoes again. Those busy volcanoes are just at it again. Oh, Marlowe, didn't they find a root system? Yes, that has been stated if you're talking about Devil's Tower, although, once again, that is highly controversial, but it has been stated. New West Reset's got it. Hexagon, you're absolutely right. There is a hexagon impression in both of them. Rescue Freedom. And New West Reset has it. It's volcanoes again. Those volcanoes are sure busy. They're just like glaciers. They can produce all kinds of unique terrain features. It's either a glacier when we have unique terrain features, or it's a volcano when we have really unique terrain features. And don't forget that lovely shiprock in New Mexico, volcanoes. You got it. Because what else would it be? It has to be volcanoes. Oh, that's a good one there, Channel 53. Looks like petrified bark streaks. It does, doesn't it? Just like it does on Devil's Tower. Great way to say it. Very succinct way to say it. Hey, Casey. Yeah, busy creating hexagons. No doubt about it. So a very geometrically symmetrical shape that is just randomly created by nature. That's what will be informed. Now, if you go back and you look at some old artistic impressions, now I don't know when this is from because it's a sketch. Now, remember, a sketch, much like a photo, does not necessarily prove anything, but it does provide clues, it does give hints. And apparently, Giant's Causeway in Ireland was once much more extensive, as this image seems to allude to. Now, was it? I don't know for sure. But the myth behind it is that legendary Irish Celtic hero Finn McCool, yes, I'm saying that in the anglicized way because if I say it in the Gaelic way, I'll get in trouble, and I'm not trying to get in trouble tonight. But anyway, a mythical Irish hero actually created this. And you might remember that's the same mythical Irish hero that we talked about that participated in that battle that we're really not supposed to talk about for some reason. I'm not sure why. That battle that occurred in Western Ireland when they resisted the forces of the King of the World. But anyway, enough about that. So we have these images that show us that apparently this Giant's Causeway was something that was much more extensive. Now, what was this? Was this the remains of some kind of giant flora or fauna? Yes, I'm using both interchangeably because we know which is which, right? But was it some sort of giant plant? Was it some kind of structure? Or was it something else entirely? No, I'm not going to go into mud fossils yet. That will be a separate live stream exploration. But it is interesting to consider all the possible origins of these unique hexagonal shapes. So, was it made by some mythical hero who actually really existed and had access to technology that's beyond our wildest dreams? Was it some gigantic life form? Was it once a giant tree? Or are the scientists correct and it's just volcanoes? Volcanoes here, volcanoes there, even though there's no active volcanoes in either location, but they're extinct volcanoes, so we can just accept their explanation. And maybe that's good enough for you. And, there was a time, I'll admit, it was good enough for me. However, it's not good enough for me anymore. I believe it needs to be scrutinized more. But that's just my impression on it. If you believe otherwise, that's all right. So let's take a look at some of the great trees that we do have images of. Now, once again, we're going to go back to the 1800s. Yeah, there you go, Jamie. Trust the science. Where's Mr. Wizard? And that's exactly what Carl will say to you. Carl Sagan, of course. So, hey, it's Space Fraggle. Good to see you, Lord Krug. I will not conform. I can just hear that Christopher Lloyd voice being said on that. So, anyway, we start by looking at some of these giant trees. And we've looked at giant trees before on the channel. We did an exploration that was dedicated to it. But I don't think we really understood, and I didn't do a very good job in that exploration of covering the extensiveness of these giant trees. I only talked about the ones in the United States and some that may have been in Europe. But the reality is they're everywhere. This image is from Mexico, believe it or not, or Mexico. And we see some very well-dressed people. Looks like we're in Oaxaca. Is that really where we are? Not sure, but very, very impressive tree in this image. So it wasn't just in the United States. Massive trees everywhere. Now, the famous example that we're aware of from the United States that we have no shortage of images from is the destruction of the redwood forest. And here you can get an idea of just how large these trees are. Now, one of the contentious points that we have with this whole concept of giant objects, whether it's plants, animals, or people, is that there are scientific limitations on how large anything can be. And you know what? That may be true. But it's intriguing to me that the further we go back in time, we have more and more examples. And by the way, I'm looking at this from a mainstream perspective as well, because even science says this. The further we go back in time, there are legitimate examples of larger flora and fauna. There are examples of larger plants and animals. And there seem to be examples of larger beings. So given the fact that both the mainstream account and the myth do agree on this fact, the only thing that varies is the timeline. So in the mainstream account, they'll tell you it was millions of years ago. And over that time, the climate differed, and therefore it was more oxygen rich. And yet, of course, there's theories about things like the water canopy and so on and so forth. No, I'm not going to get into that today, but just letting you know those ideas are out there. And that's how there may be theories for why we had this dramatic change. And there is no shortage of these impressive images where these trees seem to have been destroyed. Also interesting with the arid landscape. Now, I'm not talking about the fact that they're logging here. I understand that. But look at this landscape. Very, very interesting. I mean, I've been on a couple logging sites in my life. No, I wasn't with the loggers that got hijacked by the UFO in Arizona. But it's very intriguing that when you look at these older images, you do get this desiccated landscape where it looks just completely dry. So how the heck could there be a forest there? I don't know. Is there something else going on with the image? Is there some other event that's occurred that we're not aware of? Those are the kinds of questions I ask when I see a photo like this, because I'm under the impression there's a high probability that this may well be an authentic photo, but I don't know for sure. It is certainly a dramatic one. But what are your thoughts on that? Why do we always see this dead land? Yeah, there you go, Nomi. They emptied out the lot. That sounds about right. Ah, the Grand Canyon is a quarry. It definitely looks like that, doesn't it? I need to get back there, by the way. Dallas, trees inhale carbon dioxide and exhale oxygen. They're wondrous. They're amazing. Ah, you say it right there, KC933, Dust Bowl. Yeah, we always have that effect in those images. Hey, brother Adam Bomb, normal sized tree with a Photoshop, people. Intriguing, impressive, isn't it? Remember, never trust any image. Come to your own conclusions. And don't be afraid to ask those questions. Carol, cleaning up the dead trees after a disaster. That's the assessment that I would lean towards as well. Not to say that's exactly right. It's a theory, but yes, that's what it looks like to me in a lot of these images. That it's really just a big cleanup after, as Wynn says very directly here, the apocalypse, or as we call it, the reset. Leo, it takes almost 1,000 years for these trees to grow that big. These trees must have been very special to the native people who lived among them. I would agree with that. And it does seem that there's a lot of identity with them that continues to this very day. Now, you can even find some other images, drawings, or sketches of people who've converted redwoods into their houses. Now, did this really happen? I don't know, but it is an interesting premise. And certainly there's still redwoods to this day that are large enough, so it's not beyond the realm of possibilities. But then there's this other oddity that we have with some of these colorized images from the 1800s. Now, the reason I'm showing this is I just want to again reinforce the fact that images are altered. If we have black and white photos and we've colorized them, then have those images been altered? And if they've been altered, have they been altered in a way that would cause us to question their authenticity? Because it's a very important consideration when you're doing this kind of investigation and these explorations. You may be looking at something that's very authentic and real, or you may be looking at something that's telling you 97% truth, but 3% of it has been altered. So, did they get the actual color of the clothing right? Was this guy really wearing a blue jacket when he was just sitting in there? Oh, and look, we have a very well-dressed individual with a little mustache. How intriguing. There are two mustache guys. It looks like everybody has mustaches. I guess, this was after the Civil War when we went away from the beard and everybody went with the mustache. Where's Groucho Marx when you need him? But very, very intriguing images that we have to question, because remember, if they've altered the photo, then did they get it right? Is the coloring right? Is there something that we could even be missing if they change the coloring improperly? Because if you have a black and white photo, then how can you have any idea? Yeah, there you go, Sean. Exactly. Why would anybody take that kind of risk just to pose for a photo in their suits? Weren't they concerned about safety? Now I know everyone will tell us nobody concerned themselves with safety in the 1800s, even though we've got numerous newspaper and journalist accounts that say that, yes, people were concerned with safety, but, I guess it just depended on the day. Yeah, Jamie says it very well right there. Suspicious. Adam Bomb, 5 guys and a handsaw. That's right, brother Adam. Why don't you meet me with a handsaw and we'll see how long it takes the two of us to bring down a tree like that, right? I'm sure we could do it in 5 minutes. 5 minutes of your money back. Michael, how Da Vinci hid secret geometry behind his oil paintings. Oh, you noticed that little symbol. Yes, very, very astute of you, Michael. It just always shows up. Yeah, that's right, Space Fraggle. No OSHA back then. But remember, there was no OSHA in Starfleet either, especially in Star Trek The Next Generation. Remember how many times an episode with a falling barrel created a catastrophe? Oh, I can only imagine what happened in those cargo bays with those falling barrels all the time. Anyways. So yes, all these trees with people cutting them down with handsaws, I suppose, or were they just posing with them? I don't know. Because remember, this is after that questionable time of the United States Civil War, of the Crimean War. So who exactly knows what's going on? Here's another one for Mexico, and I'm just showing this to ensure that we realize that in other locations there were other incredibly large, thick trees. Now, were these all of the same tree variety or breeds of tree, or were there other trees that were lost, other kinds of trees that we don't have with us anymore? Because we have some of these images that, did somebody actually cut this tree down? Now, something I haven't shown on the channel yet, but I'm going to be doing it in one of the subsequent map explorations in a couple weeks, and I'll probably do it live stream because I love the feedback on it. There are several maps that I've located that actually use trees like this as known points on the map. Yes, trees that are so large and tall that they stand out in a forest and you can use them as a known point. Very interesting. Now, it'd been a subject of contention, and I remember when we did map studies back when I was still teaching, there was a lot of debate about the accuracy of the Mappa Mundi, the maps from the Middle Ages, or, where people all believed the world was round, apparently, or spherical, or globe, or whatever, even though the Bible says that the earth was flat. And we also understand that if anybody went against the Bible, especially in Europe during the Middle Ages, they faced a very terrifying death. But I guess everybody still somehow knew that. Yes, that's the mother of all conflicting accounts. And I'm not being facetious there, it really is. But then you get some of these other interesting looks. I mean, here they call this the Flatiron Tree. How intriguing. Just like the Flatiron Building. Do I see a couple faces in there, or is that just me? Is that just my crazy imagination going off on me? Ah, Sissy May right there. That's a good one. I thought lumberjacks had full beards. Yeah, you and me both. I guess they degraded to mustaches or downgraded to mustaches. So, yeah. Ooh, Earth is Flat. Great one. Yes, Rush did a good song about that. The trees. Hey, everybody! If you're into Rush, great Canadian band, I might add. Listen to that song, "The Trees." Pay attention to the lyrics; it is very interesting. So, ooh, Jamie, yeah, it does kind of look like Ents, doesn't it? Again, going back to the Tolkien legendarium, if we want to say it. Okay, so it's not just me. Thank you, Space Fraggle. Is it an entrance like Kroll? Oh, Sean, of course, bringing up my favorite movie. Yeah. So anyway, it's just intriguing though, and I'm thinking of the example of the weirwood trees from the Game of Thrones franchise, but let's be honest, it's appeared in many other franchises. So very, very, very interesting that we have images such as this, where we can see physical features. And if you look hard enough, I mean, really, I don't think you have to look very hard or use your imagination that much. Eyes, nose, mouth, little beard, eyes, nose. Oh, yeah, it's just my imagination. Okay. I'm having some kind of mental aberration here. So we'll just go on to the next image. But then there's also the account of the American chestnuts. Now, we did explore that in that exploration we did last year on the trees. And yeah, here's another rather risque photo. Let's have the ladies all sit up here, shoulder to shoulder, hip to hip, right here in this opening of this tree. And we'll just pose down here and look really cool. Ah, look what we did. Yeah, look, no facial hair here. No mustaches even. I guess we went down from that. But the American chestnut, a great tragedy, showing you exactly in this map how extensive these American chestnuts were. Now, according to accounts, these American chestnuts could be just as large, and in some cases, larger than the redwoods. Now, those are just accounts. I don't know. I didn't see any. I wasn't alive in the 1800s or even the early 1900s to know for sure. I know some of you say I was, but I wasn't. I really wasn't. But this is what the official historical account tells us, the extent of the natural range of the American chestnut. That concept that a squirrel could hop all the way from New England all the way down to Alabama and Georgia without ever touching the ground. Now, if you're familiar with Georgia, they still have a pretty nice forest once you get south of Atlanta. And I'm not even going to say anything about the mountains. Yeah, there's a forest there too. So very, very pretty state. Really, they're all pretty states. I don't know why the South gets such a bad reputation, but anyway, it's a lovely area, and it's intriguing to think that the chestnut was lost. Now, you may remember from the exploration, there are no American chestnuts because there was a blight, of course, brought in from another nation, and it destroyed the American chestnuts. Now, there are still areas that have the ability to produce American chestnuts, but is it the same tree, or is it something else entirely? And so just looking at that, yeah, there you go, Earth is Flat. If one of those acorns hits you, it'll kill you. There's also the fact that those acorns apparently had a lot of nutritional properties to them. There were a lot of old recipes that involved using American chestnuts. Yeah, there you go, Texas Redneck Hippie. And there's a lot of people in the South that are still aware of these old concepts and these old recipes, vital food source. And the Native Americans, or whoever they really were, the people that were in the area, they were well acquainted with them as well. So, Battlestar Utarian. Rush may be the best three-man rock band known in this realm, true legends. They've got some very, very revealing albums, too. Don't forget the Temples of Syrinx, right? Sissy May, are the American chestnut tree almost extinct? Officially, they are, but they aren't completely extinct. Apparently, there's still groves and there's still areas that they can regenerate them. But what we don't know is, are they the exact same trees that we had in the past? So again, I'm suggesting, is it possible that we had a much greater tree that was lost to time? That's what we don't know. Oh yeah, the 2112 overture. That's a good one. So anyway, so that's the range of the lost American chestnut. Now, let's just briefly talk about animals to an extent. A lot of people get wrapped around the bend about the dinosaurs. What I find interesting about the existence of the dinosaurs, and of course, we always have all these interesting and differing names for the dinosaurs, is, well, do you think dinosaurs could have existed? It's possible that dinosaurs could have existed. And it's interesting to me that somehow we're able to know of a life form that existed 60 million years ago. And it's very contentious when you talk about the bones and finding these dinosaurs. But once again, mainstream science and history tells us that yes, there really were dinosaurs. It was a very long time ago again. Now, is it possible that there could have been other creatures? Creatures that we might think of as mythical creatures? Creatures that we call dragons. Could they be related to the dinosaurs? Are they in fact the same creature? Is it some kind of cover up? I don't know. But there's a lot of coincidences to ignore about it if that's the case. And is it possible that if there were dinosaurs or dragons that people did coexist with them, even though science tells us it's not possible? People never could have coexisted with dinosaurs because such vast differences in the timeline and evolution or evolution, depending how you say it. Always so funny. A good example here of the mighty blue whale. The great blue whale, the life form that still exists to this day that you can still go out and see if you're lucky enough to see one in the ocean or the sea, wherever you happen to be. The very, very large and impressive blue whale. And then, of course, thinking to the, again, going back to the Tolkien legendarium, where we have Ancalagon, the dragon that was the size of a mountain. Now, again, that goes more into the mud fossil concept or theory. But it is intriguing going to these extremes because people want to say there's really no giants out there, even though everyone's well aware there's blue whales out there that are very, very large. Is it possible that there is something that was much larger and that's just been lost to time, just like with the trees? Is it possible there was once a great, incredible creature? And just for scale here, you've got the airship of the elves here, and you got some of the eagles. Yeah, if you remember the eagles from Lord of the Rings, that's the size scale here compared to Ancalagon. And here's some of the other dragons fighting with him, if you remember Smaug and how impressive he seemed. That's how incredible Ancalagon was stated to be. So again, gargantuan, colossal size, it just seems the prospect of myth and seems completely impossible. Yeah, there you go, Jamie. Leviathan. And many other names for it as well. Oh, Rachel, you also have to bring up Triumph. You know what? Yeah, it's kind of interesting. My two favorite bands are Canadian bands. Nothing wrong with that, though. Nothing wrong with that at all. But then just looking and seeing the fact that, you have blue whales that can be up to 30 meters or 100 feet long, depending, and even other large whales, the whole concept of Moby Dick. And, if you want to look up something interesting, look up the history of Herman Melville and how nobody cared a whit about Moby Dick when it was originally written. It was something that people found out about later, and then it became popular. Kind of sounds like some movies, doesn't it? But again, we have these large life forms that do really exist. And so, again, it's something that's flicking you right in the eye saying, there really are giant life forms out there. I mean, sure, if you want to say these aren't really giant life forms, I mean, it's not that big. I mean, maybe it's a matter of perspective again, isn't it? What is the largest dinosaur that ever walked? Did it ever exist? I know they've got other names for it, and they always seem to be assigning new names to dinosaurs. I think they've changed them how many times since I've been alive. And yeah, it's very interesting. Maybe we just need to get some more Jurassic Park films or Jurassic World or Jurassic Universe, whatever we're going to go with next, because, it's just going to be a remake or reimagining, and we'll get even bigger dinosaurs again because we got better CGI. Now, there's also considering the concept of mammals and what giant rhinos once looked like. And again, if you go to the Lord of the Rings concept, you can see the gigantic elephants they had. I really wonder what knowledge Tolkien actually had, because he really seemed to be well read in on some things. So, Kathy, dinosaur didn't exist. Perhaps not. But maybe something else existed that is like a dinosaur? Maybe something that we'd refer to as a beast? It's hard to say. I don't know what existed and what didn't exist, especially before I was around. But I have the impression that wondrous things existed that we only have the slightest clue about. Anyways, so that takes us out of the plants and animals variety. Let's go to what you've all been waiting for, the giant humans or other beings. Yes, I'm going to consider the fact that these may actually be other beings, just because it's that interesting. Now, let me get this image up here. And of course, we're going to go back and start with the aforementioned Alton Giant from Illinois, the Midwest. But remember, there were many other giants in other locations as well, as everybody attributed to. And you can certainly look them up on your own. So, Robert Wadlow from Illinois, 8 feet 11 inches. Very, very tall. And in the Guinness Book of World Records, nobody doubts or denies that Robert here existed and lived a life. Now, the official scientific explanation, the medical explanation, is that Robert had a very unique condition that caused him to go into this hypergrowth spurt. And science can easily explain it. And I guess that's the same explanation for anybody else that we have who was over 8 feet tall. Science can easily explain it. I always found this very dramatic, just seeing his shoe here compared to a regular size 12 shoe. You know, I like to think size 12 is a little bit on the larger size. You know, not that I'm judging anybody by their foot size, but I think he had a size 37 shoe. Just very impressive when you think of all the ways that this individual was much larger. And there Dallas lists one of the conditions that we attribute to this to. And of course, we always have our great doctors and our medical theorists who can tell us exactly what's going on, but then we still have struggles because, you know, things are always changing. So anyways, so the whole point, though, being is that Robert did really exist. Nobody debates it. Robert was nearly 9 feet tall and is still in the Guinness Book of World Records. Now, we do have other accounts, though, that say that there were large people, whether we're talking about myth. Okay, so here we have Maximinus Thrax, 8'6", shorter than Robert. So Maximinus Thrax seems like there's no question that he really was that tall. How likely was that, though, and how would you become Caesar of Rome? I don't know. Again, during the crisis of the 3rd century. About 32 years before that Lucius Aurelian guy showed up. Although he was on the scene before then, but nobody really knows about anything. But then you look at some of these others. Goliath, 10 feet 6 inches. The King of Bashan, 12 feet. And then in southeast Turkey, late 1950s. Now, remember, these have all been thoroughly debunked. We'll get into this in a second here. These are just crazy mythological accounts or things that have not been scientifically verified. But yes, this is where these rumors start. But then you've also got other indications. And there was a lot of debate about the discovery, the findings of giants in North America. And that was extremely contentious. Now, we're actually going to discuss the origin of these giants here in North America. And this is where the story really starts to get very intriguing. So, hey, RB, good to see you. Yes, President Lincoln talked about the giants found in the mounds. It was mentioned in a speech or two, wasn't it? Great reference there, RB, and good to see you. And you are absolutely right. So all these different accounts that we have of these various giants. So here, Serpent Mound, Ohio, it's only 7 feet tall. Not that tall. But then when you go to West Hickory, Pennsylvania, one attributed to being 18 feet tall. Oh, and one from the Iowa mounds being 7'6". And so what's interesting to me is that virtually all of these, with the exception of the top 4, are shorter than Robert Wadlow, a well-documented individual who's in the Guinness Book of World Records that no scientist debates existed, or historian for that fact, and yet most of these giant discoveries that were debunked, and we'll talk about how that happened, were actually shorter than him. And even the top 4, you have to wonder, how extreme is it? How unlikely is it that there were incredible giants in North America? Now, you may recall when we did Tales of the Old World, looking at some of the Native American myth, which, yes, the Native Americans do have myths of giants in North America. And yes, the Native Americans do have myths of the fact that there were cities underground and entire civilizations underground. The ant people, remember that exploration? But, you know, it's just myth. We can write it off, but they do talk about it. Of course, the one thing they don't talk about is crossing the Helicrax, or, you know, the Bering Strait when it was frozen. But what to make of some of these images that you see? And you will see plenty of images all over the place, just like I said, that will give you the impression that, yes, beyond any shadow of a doubt, there are giant skeletons out there. But again, it's something you always have to apply a degree of very careful consideration to. And there's a reason I'm slowing down my speech here. And the point behind it is there is a lot of effort to discredit the possibility of something existing by introducing something known to be a fraud. It is a tried and true tactic. And it's even in a very well documented historical story that we're going to examine here in a second. So, anytime you see a dramatic picture of skeletal remains with a giant skull or a skeleton and small people behind it or around it, just keep that in mind. Now, going back, there's stories of the giants from the Native Americans. And what were they really? Were they giant spirits? Were they some kind of giant mechanoid or something else entirely? We don't know. I will say, though, that their myths are very compelling and very interesting. New West Reset already knows what I'm going with it. Cardiff Giant. Really, am I that predictable? I guess I am. Maybe I've been doing this too long. Yeah, Atom Bomb. It's always the red-headed giants. Yeah, they talk about them in the southwest of the United States, too. What is it with red hair, anyway? You going to be a red-headed giant? I don't know. Very, very interesting. But they appear everywhere. Now, there's also giants that they found in France and across Europe. And initially, with some of the bone comparisons, these were stated to be giant human bones. But then a good 130 years later, some random anthropologist said, no, these are actually bones of a bear. There's not really a giant. So anytime you have something that's a finding, it seems to be contested. There's always a debate with it. So that's why you always have to take it with a grain of salt. But you still have these myths. I've always found the accounts of the stone giants very interesting. And, I think you all are well aware I'm a bit of a Star Trek fan. And remember that Star Trek V was originally supposed to end with Captain Kirk fighting a couple stone giants. But, they cut his effects budget and, Star Trek V got face planted. But I would still rather watch Star Trek V any day of the week over the new Star Trek films. But that's just a matter of opinion. But the stone giants are intriguing because they do appear in different myths. And they do have a lot of an appearance. And by the way, they did actually realize the stone giant in Galaxy Quest, back when they did good parodies. But then there's also the appearance of giants on all the maps. And I could have put together probably about 2 hours worth of images from the Middle Ages on all the giant humans with smaller humans. And of course, you can attribute that to, well, they were simply depicting them in scale in terms of their rank in society. That's always the justification you'll get. Oh, good one there, Jamie. Yeah, the rock giant from the Never-Ending Story, the rock biter. Great character. Yes, we got to do Old World in film again. I've got to cover Never-Ending Story. Good call out on that. So, Albie, Patagones. Yes, Patagones. And it's yes right there on the map. Or is it Patagones? Patagones. Patagonia. And you're supposed to emphasize the go, apparently. Patagonia giants. Now, according to the story, Magellan had actually picked up 2 of these, but they didn't survive to the end of the journey. Of course, neither did Magellan. He got conked on the head in the Philippines. And somebody told me they were the descendant of one of the people who did said conking on the head. What is it with all these explorers getting conked on the head? I mean, that's the same way Captain Cook ended up in Hawaii. I don't know. But it's intriguing because this goes back to discrediting the whole account of giants because this is just stated to be a myth. These crazy European explorers who somehow managed to navigate their way across hostile seas that were unexplored had this idea that there were giants. But it was never well documented. They didn't really exist. That's what the official history will tell us. So again, it's another conflicting account, as everything with the Middle Ages, medieval time, and even the early so-called age of exploration tends to be. So were there Patagonia giants? There are multiple accounts saying there were. There are multiple accounts saying that Magellan even grabbed 2 of them. Who knows for sure? Maybe it is all just myth. I don't know. But once again, taken in totality, we have another story, right, wrong, or indifferent, that says that there were giants that existed. And those are the Patagonia giants. Now, let's go to the piece you've been waiting for. Why is it that we have the Smithsonian very intimately involved with the believed assessment of the fact that giants don't really exist? The individual you're looking at here, and I'm going to try to pronounce the name properly, is Ales Hadlika, a Czech individual who was the first, and here's the real legend for you, or the real direction on it. And no disrespect to anybody who's of Czech background. I never spoke Czech, and I'm sure I completely butchered the pronunciation of the name. But he was the curator of physical anthropology of the Smithsonian Museum from 1904 to 1941. Yeah, long time there, almost 4 decades. And this individual came up with numerous theories and said that there really were no giants, that it was all just the concept of myth and people desiring to believe. Now, this guy also came up with a theory of the Native Americans coming across the Bering Strait and the origin of that, although he got himself in trouble because he said it couldn't have happened more than 3,000 years ago. Although archaeologists, and by the way, this guy was not an archaeologist, he was an anthropologist, so how the heck would he know? But, apparently he did. He was just that good. They said, no, it actually happened more than 10,000 years ago. Again, another conflicting account. It's just a little difference of 7,000 years. So, yes, this individual was the curator, was an anthropologist, and he's basically at the nexus point, if you will, of all this debate about whether giants really exist and the Smithsonian's involvement with them. You know what, Kathy? I don't even know. There's nothing that's actually attributed to that, but, given what's going on with the Smithsonian recently, I'm not saying there's anything questionable there. I would love to go see that castle, but apparently I can't right now. It's just a castle. But anyways, I don't know. Oh, look at that. I remember this guy from high school classes. Yeah. And in the 20th century, he was pushed quite hard. There were a lot of classes that talked about him and his theories. Now, there's something beyond this. Did you know that this guy in his later life, he was big on, how shall we say, the European hypothesis? And that is the origin of all human beings coming from Europe. He was also a critic of the hominid evolution. And so you can see why he kind of got himself in trouble. So it's very ironic that the guy who discredited giants also got himself in trouble with questioning the mainstream. No, I'm not making that up. Oh, by the way, he's also been linked to the development, or at least his work, to the development of American eugenics laws. And he was also an advisory member of the American Eugenics Society in 1926. No, I am not making any of this up, although sometimes I wish I were. Now, of course, we think of eugenics and we always think about the very, very terrifying examples that came with the other guy with the mustache in Germany. But there's something beyond eugenics that go beyond building superior humans. There's a darker concept that say that eugenics could also be used to, how should we say, yield a more subservient type of human being. A human being that doesn't question anything, but still has the ability to follow instructions, if you follow me. So there are two schools of thought behind eugenics. So yeah, all very, very interesting. But because of this individual being the curator with the Smithsonian and debunking giants, and then of course getting himself in trouble because he said, well, the Bering Strait crossing happened only 3,000 years ago. It didn't happen 13,000 years ago. I mean, I'm not an archaeologist, although it's funny that archaeologists are experts in digging things up and assessing how old they are, but then they're not the ones to come up with the final theories. Again, something else interesting. And, we always have this whole concept about the land bridge and the crossing of the Bering Strait, and that's the origin of all Native Americans in North and South America. And yet, oddly enough, you won't really find any kind of oral traditions from many Native Americans that talk about this crossing. And you would think this would be a very, very extreme event. Now, I'm not saying it didn't happen. It's also interesting to think that there's an analogy to this within the Tolkien mythology when the elves followed Mechlor or Morgoth to what became Middle-earth, and they had to cross the Helicrax, or the shifting ice, as it were. And there's some wondrous artwork with that. And it was a very difficult and dangerous crossing. And the question I always had is, if those people had such a good life and everything they needed in Siberia, why would you want to cross the Bering Strait anyway? I don't know. It's just one of those things, and it's one of those details that always comes up in many different references. Now, here's something else. There are a lot of media references that indicate that there really were giants. But take this with a grain of salt, because do we trust the media or don't we trust the media? That's always the question of the day. And people will say, there was once a time when there was journalistic integrity. Look, if you want to believe that, that's completely fine. Maybe there was. My perspective, the only journalistic integrity there was fiction, and that was in the original Superman comic. Outside of that, journalistic integrity is dependent on many factors. Much like academic integrity, it's dependent on many factors. Sure, if you want to think it's objective, that's completely fine. But intriguing here is that, again, we have another list of all these different giants, and mound builders actually refer to Native Americans, I suppose. Although one of the other points of contention was that the giants were just as the Native Americans coincidentally described them. They had lighter skin and red hair. So who the heck knows for sure? And here you can see where they were found. And oddly enough, you're not seeing extreme heights on these. A lot of 7-foot giants and 8-foot giants. Virtually all of these, I think only the 9-foot tall ones, are up to the height or above Robert Wadlow. So again, a well-documented world record holder that everybody knows existed, and all these giants listed were shorter. What to make of this? I just don't know. But then there's also the other concept of giant skeletons being found. Now, again, what scientists and historians will tell you is that the media was all over the place. They didn't know what the heck they were doing back in the 1800s, early 1900s. They didn't have journalistic integrity. They just ran whatever story they wanted to. Now, yes, we all know that propaganda was necessary to win World War II, and that's when papers printed what they were supposed to print. And I'm sure that after World War II, nobody ever thought that the media could be used to actually steer the entire population. Why would anybody do such a thing? It's just completely absurd. So what to make of these articles? Well, I would say that they're clues, but they need to be taken with a grain of salt. Now, moving on past clues, we're going to go with the origin of all giant contention. Going all the way back, you'll never guess it, to the 1800s, the start of everything. And that is the story of the Cardiff Giant. Now, this was a big how-to-do that started in 1869. And you see the name P.T. Barnum involved with this. A giant that was dug up in New York in 1869. And they showcased it. 10 feet, 4 inches tall, taller than Goliath, whom David slew. See, even back in the 1860s, everybody knew that story. Guess it never really went away, did it? It's always been there. And yet what we found out was the Cardiff Giant didn't really exist. It was all from the idea of this individual, George Hull. George Hull was simply a purveyor of tobacco. He owned some smoke shops. And because he got into an argument with some of his more religious-minded friends who told him, well, the Bible said giants existed and he was on his own, he wanted to do a scam to prove that anybody could be scammed. Look at those eyes. Ah, yes, those eyes that you always see in the 1800s. So yes, a guy who just ran a tobacco shop and got upset because his friends said that the Bible was right and he was wrong, which, in the 1800s, kind of like the Middle Ages, I thought, in the United States and in Europe, the Bible was the final authority. And if you questioned it, bad things would happen to you. But he decided he was going to run a scam. And he was going to run a scam by building a giant and say that it was mummified, petrified. Now, the story is really crazy because if you look up the historical account of it, Mr. Hull contracted a group of people in Fort Dodge, Iowa, no, I'm not making this up, to carve out this piece of material that this giant was made out of. Now, there's conflicting accounts in terms of what the material actually was. Fort Dodge, Iowa is also a very interesting area itself. This is what it looks like today. Yes, it's in Iowa, so naturally it's another old world community. But he told them that he was going to use this material to make a statue of Lincoln. Oh, so once again, Lincoln enters the story. But that's not what he did. And so then they fashioned the Cardiff Giant and said that they literally pulled it out of the ground and that it was a real-life mummified giant. And everybody was fooled. Now, when the media got involved and P.T. Barnum got involved, they eventually called George Hull's bluff, or George Hull just came out and said it. Here's a historical photo of the giant actually being pulled out of the ground or exhumed in 1869. So I guess they crafted it, buried it, and then pulled it out of the ground. All that work from a guy who just owned a tobacco shop. That must have been a very profitable venture. I mean, was this guy just so loaded with money? And remember, this was before we had the Federal Reserve. This was before you could take out a loan on anything and everything in the United States. You actually had to have the hard currency to do things. He apparently had the money and the time just because he was angry that some people at church told him the Bible was right. And he did this, and orchestrated this entire scam to show that anybody could be fooled. Ironically, though, this is what continues to this day, this whole questioning, this whole concept that anything that we see must be fraudulent. Even though, Robert Waldlow really did exist, and at almost 9 feet tall, he was only about 1 foot shorter than this giant that was stated to be a fraud. And of course, here you have it, the Cardiff Giant, and this is when George Hull passed away, who fooled the public with that figure, dead at Binghamton, New York. I'm sure he still had those eyes on display in his coffin. Not to be morbid about it, but it's just very, very intriguing. And here you can see some figures of this giant that was carved out. Yeah, exhumed at Cardiff. So what are your thoughts on this? Kung Fatty, some of the old world is still below the rivers and lakes, beyond any shadow of a doubt. Made from wood. No doubt about it. Oh, there you go. No primary or secondary reference or observations from the so-called science community, just his cognitive dissonance. QCZ, more red herrings. Jedi, all true giants have 6 fingers. True, except for Count Rogan and Princess Bride. But, what can you say about that? Justin says it there. I guess size does not matter. And the concept of man-made lakes. Yeah, that's true. Oh, good call out there, sissy. Its feet are awfully small. And Casey says it very well here. I think we've been lied to about everything. Now, did this even really happen? Yeah, Robert says it very well here. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether this happened or didn't. I find it interesting that this story from 1869 is so well documented and well remembered in and of itself. And it reminds me of that episode from The Simpsons, Lisa the Skeptic, and this was like the last season of the Golden Age Simpsons in the late 90s. You might remember it, where they found a skeleton with angel wings. And if you haven't seen the episode, it turned out that it was just an ad to point them to the opening of a mall. And yet people thought that it was some kind of religious sign. Yeah, Lisa the Skeptic. There's a lot of hints in this Golden Age Simpsons episode, so I would advise watching it, because you can also find, just because one person scammed a giant, does that mean that somebody else actually found a giant? Did Robert Waldlow really exist? Well, they say he did, but it's just one of those interesting things. Oh, by the way, another little note. They apparently did the same thing with Civil War General Thomas Meagher, if I'm not saying that properly, one of those Irish officers who, by the way, was involved in the revolutions of 1848 and then decided to go fight in the Civil War. Yeah, apparently they said that they exhumed his body too later. So very, very similar to the whole giant story. So what's truth and what's fabrication? In conclusion, I have no idea. I guess you just don't really know, and that's the point. So, what to make of all these giants? Well, in our explorations, we come across many structures. And what are these structures that we've seen? Are there really giant buildings? Well, what I want to get at, and we've certainly seen all the buildings that have giant doorways that you could either get giant beams or an entire army through. But I wanted to talk about the concept of colossal structures. Now, remember, this is just a concept. But it's interesting to me that we have things such as the 2-mile high tower, the Ultima Tower, and it's just a concept. But here you can see how it towers over all of the greatest skyscrapers today. A single building. That's really about the height of a mountain, albeit a smaller mountain. But then when you look at some of these other images, and by the way, here's a question. Is this a real image or is this a fabricated image? Jamie. Yeah, I'm getting there, Jamie. I'm getting there. But yes, Tower of Babel. John, ancient beings considered demigods are of the same breed. That could well be. Oh, very good, Tough. Real, fabricated. Not a real image. Oh, well, I'll let you know. You're actually both right. This is an altered image of the Adolphus Hotel. You might remember we looked at this in Dallas. So the structure is real. The details on it are real, but the image has been altered, of course, for artistic purposes. And you may remember in the Dallas exploration, we covered this, one of these fascinating hotels. But there's lots of artistic images like that that show different structures. Now, there's also other concepts of very large buildings. So we've got the Ultima Tower, we have Exceed 4000, and we've got the Tokyo Tower of Babel. Yes. Now, is it possible that there was once a time in the past when structures this large, by the way, does anybody know how tall 30,000 meters would be? And by the way, is that compared to the actual height of the Tower of Babel that it must be? Yeah, they've done a couple on it, actually. Oh, look at that, Vaughn. Easy answer. If it comes through a screen, it's not real. Oh, hallelujah. Yes, you are absolutely correct. That's why you need to go see things in person. But this concept of these structures being this large and where they've been and what they've been, it's existed a lot longer than we realize. We have these old images that show these city layouts, and they seem to be very detailed city layouts. Walls, structures, bunch of castles, some obelisks, and little Tower of Babel here right in the middle of it. Was this an actual city layout? Was this a really old bird's eye view? Or was this an actual functioning city that we're looking at? And if it is a functional city that we're looking at, how different is it from anything that we know or know of? What's the scale of it? Are there different scales of beings? There's also the relentless and ubiquitous carvings that we have. And whether we're in India or Petra, Jordan, it's very intriguing to think that mainstream history tells us that all these elaborate structures, which of course they can't say were made through natural means. Sorry, we can't use the glacier volcano explanation here. So we have to say that it was carved. Do you really think a structure this elaborate was actually carved? And if it wasn't carved, then by what means was it really constructed? Oh, very good, Rachel. Very good. Yeah, they made it from the top down. And as Leo says it, to a giant scale. And that's where things get interesting. So, does it mean there were giant beings? Does it mean that there were humans that had increased capabilities? Did they have some system like high pressure water, some other form of cutting, or is this rock actually an artificially constructed material? Was it made with some sort of frequency or sound? All theories are on the table. But it's funny how it all relates back to the possible existence of what may have been in the past. The incredible Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Where exactly was Babylon? Well, it's in what today is Iraq, I guess, but I don't know for sure. That looks familiar, doesn't it? But yet, in the background, they show the Hanging Gardens of Babylon with the Tower of Babel in the background. It was just a ziggurat. That's all it was. It really wasn't that tall. Of course, they show this one going to the sky. So, not sure what to make of it. It does, again, provide many hints and many clues. And by the way, please hit that like button and support the channel. We're coming to our final conclusion here with the giant exploration. But every time you see a large doorway, or my favorite, the very high ceilings, and someone tells you the whole reason that they built those high ceilings was for airflow. Really? They had the capacity to do that? So why aren't we still doing that today then? I want a train station like in Kansas City with a 100-foot tall ceiling so it's cooler. Why isn't everybody doing that? And why aren't we doing it today? Well, we just don't care to do it. Clara, the bubble tower has prepared the climate or weather for the city around it. Ah, yes. Very, very true. You got it, Sean. Of course it's a griffin. What else would it be? It's not really a griffin. Those aren't griffins on the Plummer building in Rochester, Minnesota. I don't know what they are. And here another one of these images. And this is actually a structure from San Francisco, the Humboldt Bank building. So it's a very real building. The details on it are very real. And I think you can see our favorite cartouche. Boy, did I get in trouble for going into that cartouche exploration, let me tell you. Oh, and a nice portal window. But the image itself has been altered. So, what am I getting at here? Just the fact that even when you have images that are of real, well documented structures with great pediments over said cartouches, it's important to remember that images can always be altered, past, present, or future. Anything you see on any screen anywhere could be altered. I always keep that in mind. And then, if you go to Ethiopia, you can find these incredible churches that apparently they just carved out of the rock. Now, let's think about this. Let's really think about this. Let's be generous here and say the mainstream account is correct. Let's say that they really did do this. How much effort would go into this? What kind of logistical effort would go into this? And by the way, all imagery aside, I've actually been on site and really seen these structures in person. They do exist, and they do exist as this image shows you that they are. Yeah, no way, says Robert. Where's the excess rock? Great question there, KC933. Where the heck is it? Laser from Vimena firing down. I would accept that as a more reasonable explanation, Sean, than somebody just carving it. Because think about that. If they carved it, all your questions are valid. What kind of logistical effort would it take to have all these carvers working on this? How exactly do you achieve these kind of details with carving? This kind of precision with hammer and chisel? Could anybody have done this at any point in time? And oddly enough, there are many structures like this all over the land. And how does it relate to giants? Well, it's again either hinting at a greater capability or a completely different kind of being. Because are giants demigods? Are they a completely different race of humans? Or has our entire species of humanity been altered over time? Have we been degraded in certain ways? Or maybe I should say, have we been reduced? Is it the other school of thought with quote unquote eugenics? No, we're not going to use eugenics to create a race or creatures that are more suited for survival. We're going to create an entire species that's more suited to follow instructions. It's nothing bad or evil. And no, there's no one who's ever written a book that talked about using eugenics in that manner, did they? So is that what happened at a much grander scale? Or is it just a crazy idea? Because when you look at some of these artistic renderings of cities from Sumer and Babylon, they seem to defy any capability of any sort of time frame. I know they're just artistic renditions. But then, you look at the Art Deco buildings, and no one can even build Art Deco buildings like this anymore. And why is it we have all these Art Deco buildings that have this, how shall we say, image alteration done on them? It's kind of the same thing with the Cardiff Giant. It's a fraud. If we induce one fraud and everybody knows about it, then ultimately everything that is found with it is a fraud. It's the all or nothing principle. And it's funny to me how that always seems to apply to anything and everything. Reminds me of an exploration I was doing where I just happened to mention the whole diamond concept with the 4 state capitals of Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, and Illinois. Someone said, well, I plotted the coordinates and that line wasn't exact. And that was just one sentence in an exploration that I'd done. That was about 40 minutes long. So yeah, I guess if you prove one thing wrong, you prove everything wrong. Great thought process there. And yes, Jamie, I am going to show the Tower of Babel again because I've always found this image very compelling. Is it possible that there were once structures that were this large and really had this kind of impression on the landscape? Here's what's interesting to me. And thanks, Jacob. I appreciate that. And this is what I'm going to say in conclusion to this whole concept of giant everything. Everybody still remembers the story of David and Goliath. It was remembered in the 1860s. Apparently, it's remembered now. Everybody knows the story of the Tower of Babel. It was known in the distant past. Incredible structures here. I know that John Levi and many other explorers have looked at these and showcased this very prominently. And you can see everything, even details of a reset down here with the older structure, the foundation structure below this interesting cylindrical structure, nice dome and lots of columns on it. And even some, igloo type structures? Very interesting. Little domes. What were they indeed? And yet you have other structures. Oh, look, more domes over here. But then just this mammoth, incredible tower. And remember, if you watch the film Metropolis, one of the first science fiction films, not the first, but one of the early well-known ones from the 1920s, then what is the name of the tower that the city is run from? Is it all a coincidence? I'm not really sure. Is it possible that someone really did build a structure like this? Again, were they giant beings or were they just humans with enhanced capabilities? Maybe they were both. But like I said, we still remember this. These stories endure. The Tower of Babel, David versus Goliath, and every other myth of giants from every other culture and religion and everything that you can originate it from. Albie, inside the ziggurats, there was a bar area. Oh boy. Yes, Metropolis. Absolutely right. And KC says it. Maybe they were not human at all. Maybe not. Maybe they were beings from a completely different land. Who knows for sure? But it's all interesting thoughts. It's a 5-story building. That's not a tower by modern standards. Yeah, sure. So it's just interesting, though, when you look at this and all these ideas with the structures. So, in closing, wonders of the previous era. Why is it I always go back to the 5 eras theory? Why do I think it's still relevant after all this time? The reason being is that I think that every bit of evidence and example that we look at, it goes back to the 5 eras theory. What were the real wonders of the previous eras? It seems to be clear that technology was greater in the past, that the capabilities of humans or whatever beings were around was greater. Clara, the giants built the palaces for the gods, and when they went home again, we occupied everything and caused trouble with the giants, perhaps. That could be. And if you listen to the prologue that's wonderfully delivered at the start of Conan the Barbarian, it actually says that very thing. So, anyway, it's one of the foundational ideas of the channel, though, and it's a theory, and it's still a theory. But in the past, we had greater capability. And who knows, maybe it wasn't we. Maybe it was a completely different set of beings that we can't even define. As KC said, maybe they weren't even human. We don't know. But in the distant past, whoever was on the land seemed to be capable of much greater achievements. And we can still see the remnants of it in many places. So we will be doing a live stream in the future concerning both these maps that show us where these trees are that you could do navigation with, and also the concept of mud fossils, because I think they're very, very interesting. Sean, humans were larger back when. Giants were different breeds, hence giant doors and structures. And there is a lot of evidence to back that up. David, atmospheric changes between eras could have changed our physical attributes, air pressure as examples. And I think that's something we have to remember, that when we look at these different eras, things changed in every way we can even begin to imagine between the 4th and the 3rd era. Perhaps that's the huge change that we had, that these resets were such profound events, these hard resets, that everything, in a manner of speaking, was turned upside down. I mean, just think about that. Are there really any limits to physical laws, or could all physical laws have been different? Could there have been forces that we think of as magic in the 4th era? And really all it was just more advanced technology that we still refer to as alchemy. That's just the previous era. What sort of incredible things existed in the first 3 eras? And there's a reason why you can't really touch the first 3 eras, because it was so long ago, at least in terms of relative time to us. I mean, who knows how long ago it really was? Maybe it was only 400 to 500 years ago, real time. Although we don't even know what date it is or what year it is. That's why I just laugh on, putting any kind of current year. 2023? Well, what's the difference between 2023 and 2025? I don't know. Was there a 1750? Was there an 1850? People think it was just 1,000 years that was added or taken away from the timeline. Well, how the hell do we know where we are in the timeline? It's a guess. Yeah, if you take a lot of things at face value, which requires trusting a lot of people, yeah, as Michael says it here, J850, then yes, maybe you can get an idea, but we just don't know. Yeah, and there you go, KC933. Or as the famous saying goes, it's the agreed upon truth or the agreed upon lie, depending on one's perspective. And so that's where we have to look at it. That's where it all begins. Anyways, so what to say about giants? There are a lot of indications that giants existed. And despite all the effort to try to convince us otherwise, we can't deny the fact that every culture, every myth, every origin refers to them, just like they refer to colossal buildings. And you can go out there and you can actually see these buildings with your own eyes. You can go to Portugal, Spain, anywhere in the land and see these giant doorways, see these giant structures, and you can come to your own conclusions. But they are real and they can be interfaced with. And yes, if you're in Kansas City, go to Union Station there. Look at the ceiling. Maybe you will accept the fact that it was just done for cooler air in the early 1900s. But that's where we are. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this exploration on giants. And before you go, please hit the like button. And I know it's a little bit outside of the comfort area for a lot of explorers. And I know there are some alternative explorers who won't cover giants at all. And that's nothing against them because it is a contentious topic. And there are a lot of questions with it. But it's something that we're going to continue to explore. And it's something that we need to look into. And you know what, QCZ, I'm glad you brought that up. Gulliver's Travels alone is a great exploration. And yeah, it got me as well. Hey, Donna Marie, good to see you. Well, everyone, thank you for joining me. Please hit the like button before you go, and we'll see you on the next live stream. And this is Lucius Aurelian signing off. Have a great week wherever you are.